Twisted here with the opener sorcery, and today I am joined, as usual and frequently, by my lovely co-host Debbie here, but also by our good old friend Bodizen. Say what's up to the people, Bodie.
What's up to the people, buddy?
Okay.
That works.
Yes, exactly. Now today the main subject is going to be the idea of presence, mindfulness, and the power of now, just the general concept of it, and also in reference to the book The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, which Bodhi and I happened to read together at his recommendation quite a while back in, like, our group of friends and such. And I would say that it's pretty damn good considering the fact that in terms of the recent video that was done about book recommendations, it was included on there as well as a New Earth. And yeah, and also just kind of like as a little more background context as to before this video started, at least in kind of like the series of how they'll be releasing on the channel as how they're scheduled. At the end of the time video, like I kind of like left it off at like the point of presence, and I covered it generally speaking from my perspective. But truth be told, right, like right after that happened, we had Bodhi come around and hang out for a bit, and it's like, you know what, perfect timing, set it up, to go ahead and discuss the subject further or to get additional insight on that subject as opposed to just myself speaking on it from both him as well as Devi. So, in that sort of sense, Bodhi, go ahead and introduce yourself to the people, to anybody out there who doesn't necessarily know who you are. However long or short you want that introduction to be, just go ahead and do what you do, man.
Hi, I'm Bodhi. Um, I'm a spiritualist. I call myself a cosmic free thinker, qigong instructor. That's all I can think about right now.
Oh, all right, that works. So yeah, when it comes to the topic of presence, right? As you are our esteemed guest and all that, what immediately comes to your mind when you think of like presence and just that term, or from like an experience point of view? Just go ahead, man.
The first thing that came to my mind is mindfulness, because mindfulness is like a basic practice of being present, I think. And I think I was meditating or practicing mindfulness one time, and this idea came to my mind that you're walking around with a rock in your shoe or rocks in your shoe, and meditation is taking the time to sit down and take the rocks out of your shoe, and mindfulness is making sure you don't get any more rocks in your shoe. However best you can do that. So that's one of the things that come to my mind when thinking about
And
presence.
yeah, that actually in of itself, I would say, is a pretty good analogy. At least from my understanding of presence being that, like, it is, you know, obviously as stated, the the power of now, like being in the now in of itself, but just being observational of the now, being aware instead of having that haze, instead of having that overlaid sort of like, going through the world, you're not really, giving a damn about what else is going on, not paying attention. Like, there's this one phrase that I'm sure we've all heard, or at least many of us have heard, of, going ahead and smelling the flowers, smelling the roses, taking time for that sort of thing. Or I'm sure you're going to go ahead and think of what I'm going to ask you to say, Debbie, of this saying. But what is the phrase that the kids go ahead and say quite a bit
Touch
when it comes to
grass.
grounding?
Go touch grass. Yes.
Yeah.
What Is it?
Very much, absolutely. My take is very very similar, because I think we get so caught up as a society, um, in okay, what needs to be done. We got checklists and all of these things and so many responsibilities that we're not focused on what we're doing at the present moment. We're always thinking ahead, going to the next task and the next task and the next task. And presence is more so focusing in on, okay, but this is right now. Am I breathing? Am I how do I feel? What are all the sensations? What is um like how does the ground feel on my feet? How does this feel in my hands? Like all of that, and like being right there in that moment versus letting your brain wander off into tomorrow or the next day, or lagging back in what happened yesterday or the day before.
Oh yes. That makes me think of there's this one particular sort of transcript, right? And I will likely go ahead and include it in the video description where a Swami Prabhupada goes ahead and I believe this was like written down in the 70s or so, but there's this man named Swami Prabhupada, and he goes ahead and he discusses the nature of people being um, one of four sort of distinct, classes, you could say. That being the busy fool, busy intelligent, lazy fool, and lazy intelligent. And the whole goal of a person, like once, like it's, we go ahead and the summary of it is, without getting into the differences between the classes in itself, because I would need to reread it to reacquaint myself with it. But generally speaking, it goes along with that notion of people go ahead and make themselves busy, or they focus so much on the mundane tasks, and overcomplicating them, that it gets in the way of like going ahead and doing the simple things that are required for survival needs, such as eating and drinking and shelter and all of that. That we go ahead and we make it so complicated as, okay, we're gonna go do our 9 to 5, we're gonna go ahead to the grocery store, and we're gonna go ahead and drive around, do our commute. Oh, we gotta pick up the kids, we gotta go ahead and do this, that, and the third. Whereas, like by the end of the day, because we are so preoccupied with these things and all that, we don't have time for introspection or, being within the present moment or anything like that. We're always distracting our minds. And from his perspective, um, generally speaking, whether it is of that of a more so ascetic like individual or monk like individual, or just anybody who is capable of doing so financially, that you can go ahead and be lazy. Like, the goal of life is laziness. I remember that's the actual name of the transcript. Um, and in of itself, just realizing that a lazy life in his context is not necessarily a bad thing, because like, you're not doing unnecessary work, you're not going ahead and tying yourself down to these things. You are opening up yourself to the being able to be in the present moment and being able to relax enough to where you allow the sensory, the different sensations of the world to be observed and such, and to have time for meditation and spiritual insight and things like that. So that's kind of like my little gist of that right there. Um, Bodhi, in having heard that yourself, I don't know if you're all too acquainted with that particular transcript or talk, but is there any sort of examples that someone else has stated, like, a figure such as Alan Watts, what have you, who has spoken quite a bit about mindfulness and all that, or anybody you've personally known, or even from yourself, that kind of sticks out to you as like a good example of like being in the present moment or sharing that? with yourself or just in general.
Well, I'm reminded of this guy named Michael Brown who wrote a book called The Presence Process that I read a few years ago. And you read this book and you get through the introduction part and then the first few chapters, and then you take it. I think it's like week by week. I think it's like a 10-week process or something like that, or it's either 10 weeks or 3 months. I can't remember, but there's a different prompt each week, and you're doing this meditation um, with this mantra or like this phrase that you keep saying to yourself, but it changes with every inhale and exhale. So when you inhale, you say I, exhale, am here now in this, and you do that for like 15 minutes with your eyes closed. And no matter what emotions come up or anything like that, you're just staying present with it, not judging what's coming up, just letting it be processed with the phrase or the mantra. Um, so this guy created this because he used to do a lot of sacred peyote ceremonies and things like this. And he noticed that when after a few months that he would have to do the peyote again because he wasn't able to stay in present pretty much after the medicine wore off. So he created this method to be able to be present all the time without needing any substances. Um, Pretty interesting book. I would definitely check it out. It's called The Presence Process.
Oh yes, and in terms of you mentioning recommending it, I am taking a note down to also include that in the description in of itself when this is posted. But to actually go ahead and speak about like, so I have not read the book itself nor know of its methods, but one thing that you touched upon was that he utilized peyote as a method of getting into the present moment. And from the experiences of quite a few people that I have heard from, because I in myself have not delved into psychedelics, entheogens, different substances like that.
Okay.
Um, and but from my conversations with others, that in of itself is definitely a useful tool that can be used for that, as well as other sorts of insights in different spiritual experiences, positive or negative. Now Devi, in that sort of sense, right, like,
Hmm.
um go ahead and share if you wish, like if you have gone ahead and tried these sorts of things out, or if you have heard of anybody and like kind of like their trip reports of like what is that they've gone ahead and experienced similar to like the present moment and all that sort of thing.
I mean the people that I know that have, tried substances, because as you well know, I am like very vanilla when it comes to anything like that. Like your girl is a lightweight even when it comes to alcohol. It's bad. Like I don't partake. But um in that I actually have a theory about it, and the reason why I believe that it works to bring you into the present is because it makes those senses that we dull so much during the day, and like we're drowning out sound, we're drowning out touch, like those people that are, think a busy New York City street, right? They're bumping into people left and right, but they're so focused on what they're doing, like they don't even recognize. But on those substances, everything is so heightened that you're not able to be in your head. You have to be in that moment in its entirety. Sounds are more vivid, colors are more vivid, um, touch, taste, smell, all of it is more vivid in that physical experience, that you're really not able to just completely think, oh, I have to get this done tomorrow. Or, I know there are those that their minds don't let them like let go of things from past experiences and traumas and things like that, and that can come up and kind of bite them in the ass during the experience. But once they're able to get past that, it's more of just watching the world around you and enjoying, from what I understand. Um,
Oh yes.
but that's really my theory on it. Of course, unsubstantiated, just Devi putting puzzle pieces together.
Oh yes. Well, like even stepping away from like psychedelics and entheogens and stuff like that, right? Of like the peyote, ayahuasca, DMT, sort of variety. At least I can say for myself, now that I actually think about it, like I'm recalling my own experiences, just like smoking weed, the good old Mary Jane, and all that. That I'm not gonna lie, me trying to go ahead and sing that was probably a bit off-putting, a little tiny bit off pitch, but yeah, like shout out to Rick James for that dope ass song, but in my own experiences with that, like because like I go ahead and in my own mind, like I have like a lot of things popping through, thoughts, ideas, whether it be like of a creative nature or like overthinking or what have you. It is usually churning, so the sort of thoughts like that are going on and all that slows down while I'm going ahead and I've been high, and that in of itself being useful. um, it was not necessarily the intent going into it to go ahead and be like, I'm going to be in the present moment, I'm going to be in the now. But looking back at it in hindsight, it definitely allowed me to go ahead and like have my mind settle down, to have everything slow down and just be more so in that particular moment and all that sort of thing. Two different varying degrees based on the strain and the potency, and or whether it was sativa or indica or hybrid or whatever the case may be. Now, Bodhi, to what extent, whether it be with entheogens, psychedelics, or weed or anything like that, right? Like, do you have any particular like experiences that you wish to share, or just the general nature or notion of that in of itself, and like how it may have helped you, be more so present?
Yeah, I've tried a few things here and there. Um, One particular substance that I don't feel called to name right now. Um, it forced
Yes.
me to turn inwards though, and at a young age, and it was a catalyst for um, awareness and spirituality in my life because it made me question myself and reality, and question I act, um, how how I act, how it affects others around me, and the world around me and the universe and stuff like that. Um, it didn't make me fully aware, but it did make me generally aware, if that makes sense. So that's something that
Oh
definitely
yes.
helped, and still utilize some psychedelics here and there, um, from time to time. Definitely gonna try microdosing. I've also tried this medicine called Combo. It
Yes.
comes from a frog in I think Peru. It's not a psychedelic, but it makes you purge, um, like purge negative old patterns and negative emotions. Um, and you there's a subtle but noticeable difference in your being afterwards, with anxiety and things like I suffer from these things, like I wouldn't say I suffer from them, but not a good word to use, but I I'm learning to heal these things, this anxiety and depression and psychosis and stuff like this.
Oh yes.
Um, and I'm trying all means that I can find to get past that and heal and be more present and be there for myself and others. And I'm not trying. I'm trying to leave no stone left unturned. You know what I mean? Um,
Oh
Hmm.
and
yes, I
try to
get what you mean,
eventually
man.
get off of um, conventional medication if I can. But I used to be opposed to conventional medication, and now I'm like, well, sometimes you need it, you know? and I see people that do need it, and when they start taking it, they're more stable, and they're like, "Well, I'm just gonna stop taking it now." And I'm like, "Are you sure you want to do that?" And they're like, "Yeah." And then they go through a spiral, and not much I can say or do to get them to do what's good for them. They just gotta
Oh
learn
yes.
themselves, you know. But yeah, sorry, I kind of went off on a
Oh yeah.
tangent there.
No, that's perfectly fine.
Hey, bruh, talk about it. Like I said, like before we went ahead and had this conversation. Say it with your chest. You know what I mean? Like, hey, man, yeah, like it's all good. But yeah, just like yeah, different substances work for different people. Whether it's of a pharmaceutical variety or more so natural variety or whatever. Everybody's got different biochemistry. Everybody's got different puzzle pieces, you could say, or they are a different puzzle piece. And of course, like with that, with different puzzle piece, like different like things are gonna fit into your puzzle piece better than others, to use that sort of analogy, right? And yeah, just in that sort of nature, like I can say for myself, like for me, at least from what I've observed in myself thus far, like I am not necessarily wanting to engage in pharmaceuticals and anything like that. Um, for just about anything, but I in and of myself have not necessarily had to delve into usage of those for any sort of like being depressed or being depressed or like nervousness or anything like that. Now that doesn't apply to everybody else. Everybody's got to find their different means, and it is an ongoing process, like you said for yourself. Like in me saying, "Oh, I don't necessarily have to use this substance or that substance or whatever the case may be." Like everybody's journey is different. Like if you want to talk about, at least from my own personal anecdotes of like, all right, when did I start like having like changes happen for like noticing changes within myself and my perception widening up, you know and all that sort of thing, and whether it be a positive or a negative nature, and kind of getting into like a depressive state because of certain instances happening, like that was like pretty much just as soon as I became a teenager. And like here I am now, like a decade plus later on, and like it's still an ongoing journey. Like I've gone ahead and you could say like built up a foundation of sorts, brick by brick, day by day, and all that sort of thing. And truth be told, it never stops. Like you're continually building throughout the course of your life, and whatever stage you want to go ahead and like try to assess yourself as being in, or what have you. Like it's an ongoing journey, and like I want to go ahead and pass the baton to you, Debbie, and in that sort of nature, like um in terms of being present, in terms of like reaching a place where being present is more so accessible, or to however descript or just general you want to be about it, like um you know what would you say with your own sort of journey and whatever tools you may or may not have utilized, right? Like,
Hmm.
what do you feel like is the best you can explain it of trying to build a foundation for yourself, and all that, and get over what it is you have to get over to
Okay.
make being in the present moment more so of an easier thing to do, or a I'm trying to think of the word, second nature. There you
Yeah.
go.
No, I haven't fully reached second nature status with present moment, and like I've made it no secret, like your girl has depression, your girl has anxiety, your girl has PTSD. Like it is a clusterfuck in my head, which is fantastic. Um but I have found that those moments of peace is when I'm really focusing in on being in the moment and actually like sitting there with like a leaf in my hands. And I'm sitting there and I'm just describing this texture of the leaf to the wind, and I'm just talking about it, because I'm right there in the moment and not focused on other things. Um, I feel almost like because of how we are programmed, one of the reasons why we do have such a rise in anxiety and depression and all of that, and just general lack of enjoyment with the life experience as a whole, is because we have so much life clutter, um, where you have to be in like 10 different places at once and multitasking no matter what you're doing. If you're not making money while you're sleeping, then you're a failure. If you're not um, doing laundry and dishes simultaneously, then you're a failure. Like all of these things, right? Um, and that creates that void where all of those negative emotions and stressors come in. And one of one of the reasons why I do believe we have such an unhealthy society. But certainly just kind of sitting with myself and just describing that moment, um, either with a smell, like I love my incense, and I'll just sit with my incense and just like watch the smoke and just enjoy that and be in that moment. Or even with my children, just, talking with them and being completely right there in that moment with them. Um, that brings a lot of enjoyment as well. So it's finding finding what works for you. Some people, they need that talking it out with like a therapist or a close friend or anything of that nature. Some
Oh
people,
yes.
they do have the chemical imbalances of the brain where like your brain just does not make dopamine anymore. It just doesn't happen. And so, yeah, you need help. And you may need to be on some antidepressants or things of that nature. For some people, the more naturalistic substances are going to be able to trigger that neuroplasticity and um, bring a whole lot of healing to you. And congratulations, like whatever path you take, you're taking the path that's right for you to be able to heal and fully be in a moment instead of lingering in all of the other ones.
Oh yes. And I want to go ahead and like immediately swing it over to you, Bodhi, and kind of like as Debbie described, the sort of simple life sort of pleasures, right? That have allowed her to enjoy that moment and all that sort of thing. And excuse me, but those simple moment sort of pleasures, like hang out with her kids and all that sort of thing that allow her to be more so in the present moment by my understanding and interpretation. So like kind of like instead of like okay, doing this meditation or going ahead and trying to like put yourself in that frame of mind, like what would you say for you just like general mundane activities that go ahead and bring that about for yourself that you noticed like in that moment or kind of like you're reflecting on it later on.
I think gardening, music, art, um, tai chi and qigong. These are things I do mostly on a regular basis. Maybe not so much a tai chi and qigong lately, um, but these things help me feel present and alive. And I think anything that helps me enter like a flow state um, definitely helps me be more present and open up my senses to the things that I'm doing. Yeah.
Oh yes. And you mentioned the flow state, right? And I believe like at least once or twice thus far here, with the series of videos that we've done for our channel and all that, like the flow state in of itself has been mentioned, and I think it's something that we'll probably be talking a bit more so moving on forward. But um, I guess we can go ahead and talk a bit about now of like the flow state and swing it back to you, Debbie, of like what does the flow state go ahead and like mean for you in relation to the concept of presence or mindfulness, or just in general?
Oh gosh. Flow state is one of my favorites, honestly. So whenever I'm able to completely think of it almost as I'm able to disconnect with the thinking mind and just be with the mind where everything is happening right as I'm experiencing it. And just sitting with it and describing it. And as you well know, through our many practices and meditations and everything, I'm very much a vocal person, and so I'm saying it as I'm seeing it, as I'm feeling it, as I'm experiencing it. And once I'm able to do that, then it's just like this flood of information. But if I try to cling on to it and if I try to hang on to it, then that kind of like breaks, that like puts like a dam in the river of information that I'm receiving, um, which like stops the whole process, and then it has to kind of like start all over again and be redone. Which is also why I like recording my meditations or recording any kind of flow states that I do have, because it makes it so much easier to be able to go back and see what I said versus trying to retain it in the mind in and of itself. Like I may have like some glimpses of the visuals, but it's not like, we're catching a fish and we have the fish physically. It's more just like, okay, we're literally watching a school of fish go down the river. You can catch one, but you're not going to catch them all unless you just observe and speak on them.
Oh yes, yes. I think that in of itself definitely it is well put in your own like experiential telling of the flow state and all that sort of thing. And at least from my own particular verbiage, I kind of refer to it as like a stream of consciousness, you could say, whether it is like the actual like going ahead and stream of consciousness thoughts and kind of like going through them in like a verbal sort of manner, like conversation, or like a monologue, which I happen to do quite a bit at times. Which we could just go ahead and say in more so a regular manner of ranting, as you guys have definitely spent quite a bit of time hearing me go ahead and do for better or for worse, I will say. But
We love our twist head talks. I mean, we're just used to it by now.
yeah. But yeah, so when it comes to the flow state in of itself, right? Like being in the zone, you could even say from like a like athlete perspective, or writing creatively or whatever sort of avenue that works for you. Just that and all of it is interrelated to just being in that present moment. Things slow down a little bit, you know, and also they just go ahead and allow for just more so naturalistic thoughts, intuitive thoughts, whatever, to go ahead and come through your brain. And if you wish to go ahead and state it, then of course, going ahead and do so. And whether it is something that is produced by yourself, you could say, or at least you attribute to yourself, or maybe it's in relation to some sort of external force, like a god or goddess, or an angel, a demon, a spirit of some sort, a deceased relative, an ancestor, or source, the quote unquote like God, singular, or the universe, or whatever sort of like you may attribute to. Like, yes, like being in the present moment allows you to, whether you are consciously aware of it or not, tap into like a more so expansive like manner of existence and consciousness, at least by my understanding, conceptually as well as experientially, and from what other people have shared with me experientially. Now, Bodhi, I will go ahead and swing it over to you in the sense of like, what would you say, at least, if you have had any sort of significant experiences or wish to share them, of like instances where, using this particular term, like channeling, right? You may have gone ahead and experienced in like a moment of being present or in a flow state, from whatever sort of, like, you could say outside influence, or at least outside of the persona of Bodhi that you like exist within, right? What happens to come to mind, if anything at all, in that sort of regard?
Well, some of the music I wrote in 2017 um felt sort of channeled. I remember sitting in this cob house, and there was like a sunroof, circular sunroof thing at the top, um made of glass, and I can like see the stars through it. And I was sitting there with my guitar in the dark, and then this song just came to me, and I was just like had a little light for my phone or something like that. But I was like writing down the lyrics as they came in, and it's like happened to me a few times with a few songs that year, where I just felt like I was channeling them, and I didn't have to change any of the lyrics or any of the chord progressions, because it was just like the way it came through was just amazing. Yeah, that's what comes to mind with that.
Oh yes. And not only just for yourself, but at least from my understanding, when it comes to inspiration of a creative nature, in whatever manner it may be, whether it be musical or say like inventions or anything like that, many people, like, whether they be notable and like known by the world at large, or even just like, individuals that, I've come across in like, my own personal life, um, there has definitely been quite a few stories of attributions to something higher or outside of themselves going ahead and granting, like, that inspiring sort of, whatever it may turn out to be and manifest as, but like be like, hey, look, you know what? You should go ahead and try this out. You should go ahead and, like, as you're saying, try out this chord progression, or, these certain lyrics, or what, you got that idea, that little spark in your head, kind of like the light bulb going off of, if you go ahead and you take this wrench and you put these certain nuts and bolts together on whatever contraption, you go ahead and have yourself a nice old invention, and potentially go ahead and make yourself a success business wise. And I could list many examples, but Debbie, do you happen to have any sort of like experiences from yourself, or kind of like shared in the secondhand nature, where you could say like inspiration hit that you were
Yes.
channeling from and it came from somewhere else?
I would say that happens all the time. Um Now, like I don't share my poetry, I don't share any of that, but it'll hit like a tidal wave and I'm just like, "Ah, well I'm writing now." Um or like so I used to work at UPS, right? Um and being like one of those loaders in the back of a trailer and just kind of being able to be by myself, like I would be singing to myself all night long, and I would have music that just entered my head, and I'm coming up with the lyrics on the spot, the the melody on the spot. It's just happening. And yes, it would be instantaneous and as if I'm just pulling it out of the air. Couldn't say exactly where it came from. Most of the time, it's those kinds of words that are healing a part of you that you didn't know was hurt. Um, and just very much kind of self expression in a channeled fashion.
Oh yes, yes. I would say that also for myself, that I can go ahead and attest to that sort of thing happening. Like, um, at present, I'm not necessarily all too like focused in or allowing myself the space, or like the mental space, the time to go ahead and work on musical sort of things. More so like putting my creative energies into the YouTube channel of itself, and just talking about different subjects and all that. But definitely during that sort of time, I would say, like, when I was more so focusing on it, that there would be times where I'm just going ahead and like doing what I do, like production wise. and like more so lyrically to start off, but then I kind of went more so the production route and all that. Um, but in any case, there would be times where sometimes I just go through the motions, you could say, and kind of like come out with more so of like a like, all right, you know what, like because I have the skills, because I have like my own routine, my own sort of thing, like this in of itself is like what I could say is like more so what I'm used to. But then like whether it is like something that I'm more so used to or something that is like out of my own box, right? That I usually put myself in because of that sort of standardization of a process that, I come up with and it's like, oh, this right here. It just happened to come out and it's pretty damn good for my own assessment. And, from what I've shared with you guys of like, by your own assessment as well. Um, at least that's the feedback I've gotten on certain things. But yeah, generally speaking, um, yeah, I can recall like, I guess the way to put it is like I in terms of my own like musical production sort of process, right? Like for the most part, I usually go ahead and sample stuff, right, from records and like go ahead and like through that kind of like chop it, change pitches, like loop it, reverse it, do all that sort of manipulation, add drums and all that, because my main form of production is hip hop production, and all that sort of thing, things for my homies to rap on pretty much. And like like sometimes once again it's that sort of formulaic sort of thing. Like, all right, at this point, I know like what to do in this sort of situation, um, to get kind of like what I want. But then a lot of times it's just the throwing shit at the wall and seeing what sticks, and that sort of thing. And when you go ahead and you do that sort of approach and you kind of like do it less mechanically, yeah, that's when I would say a lot of, if not uh, just about everything that I've made that I'm the most proud of or confident of came from. Is just going ahead and putting pieces together and just seeing what sticks, what fits, and just being like, all right, this works. We're just gonna go ahead and run with it. Um, so yeah, in that sort of sense, like, yeah, that's what I can go ahead and attest to right there. In one thing I did want to go ahead and mention for myself, like before we went ahead and hopped into this conversation, like um, you know, I think it was like before I went to sleep, and all that. I actually went ahead and checked out that new episode of She-Hulk, right? The
Hmm.
new like Marvel show on Disney Plus. And one thing that was discussed on there, right, is actually like presence and mindfulness practices and methods. And to give just the general gist of the show in of itself, it's not really that big of a spoiler, and it is the first episode. But you know, okay, so Bruce Banner's cousin Jennifer Walters, she becomes She-Hulk through a blood transfusion of sorts. I'll let you guys go ahead and watch the show to see exactly what occurs. But in any case, in order for her to tame the Hulk, right, the She-Hulk within her, to make her more so well adjusted to society, with Bruce Banner as her mentor, the original Incredible Hulk. One of the methods they went ahead and tried employing was, presence and mindfulness methods and like, meditative practices and things like that. And like, not completely giving quote verbatim from the show itself, but the general just being like Jennifer Walters, like, wow, like I didn't know you're into sort of like mystical sort of stuff and, woo woo sort of, at least from her perspective, like nonsense. But Bruce Banner was like, hey, 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 like this is scientifically proven. These are verifiable methods, even from like a materialist standpoint, a secular standpoint, considering like the character of Bruce Banner being very much a scientist and in that realm of thinking. So I guess to go ahead and shift things over to that sort of realm, like you know how presence and mindfulness methods and all of that are in of themselves like there's many different like books and studies talking about these. And as you mentioned beforehand, the book The Presence Process by Michael Brown, Bodhi being one of them. So I'll go ahead and ask you, aside from that, like, do you know of any particular studies in of itself that people out there can go ahead and check, or any sort of reports or anything like that, kind of like covering the scientific lens and using the scientific method to go ahead and support these different sorts of practices and methods?
Um, Nothing comes to mind right away, but I did take a course on mindfulness that's free online. It's called Pulse Mindfulness, and they have a lot of that scientific research and practices and all that stuff you'd like to learn on there. Yeah.
All right. And what about you, Debbie? Do you happen to have any sort of resources, any sort of things that you can point anyone listening into that kind of brings more so of that scientific uh, verification, scientific, like, okay, you know what, this is all sound. It's not just some mystical woo woo sort of stuff,
I
as a lot
mean,
of people are taking it as.
I don't have any specifics, but I know that things like this have been studied in terms of psychology. So I'll see if I can find some from a psychological standpoint, and I'll place it in the description. But off the top of my head, no, I don't have any studies presently. Um, I just know like I'm very much like a somebody that studies psychology from the couch, obviously. um so like I'll take a look and I'll read, and understand and gain insight in that direction, but of course not a practicing psychologist or a psychiatrist.
Oh yes. Oh
But
yes.
any anything like that, if I do find like a particular study, I will put the link in the description.
Oh yes. And like, even though, like, I just went ahead and asked you to, like, oh, is there any sort of peer reviewed sort of studies that can go ahead and, like, prove or show the benefits of these methods, and, all that sort of thing, to be like, oh, this is realistic, sort of, um, like, information, like, trying to think of a particular term, empirical evidence that showcases um, the benefits of these methods and practices, right? At the same time, I'm just gonna have to say, like, you don't need that. You don't need that shit. Like, because truth be told, right? Like, it is good, and I am very much for bridging the mundane and the spiritual, the exoteric and the esoteric, and putting it together and having both at your disposal for whatever sort of person you're talking to, or whether they're more so grounded and like completely, like, you could say, their heads chopped off in terms of, like, the spiritual awareness and capability, or someone who's more so like head in the clouds and like they're not necessarily grounded and they're all floaty and all that sort of thing. But truth be told, the best sort of thing is like experience, right? Is just going ahead and trying out for yourself of different methods and practices, and going ahead and being like, you know what, I will try these different mindfulness methods and all these sorts of things. And throughout this conversation, we've gone ahead and mentioned, different like ways you can go ahead and come across, like, different techniques, you could say, like, once again, the presence process, by Michael Brown, that Bodhi went ahead and mentioned, or the power of now by Eckhart Tolle. He talks about in that book, he talks about the concept of it a bit more so, but he also has another book called Practicing the Power of Now. That is a companion piece and is a sequel to The Power of Now. And that has more so like a practical, um, like, group of exercises that one can go ahead and do for that sort of thing. Um, and there's plenty more so things that one could potentially do. So I just want to go ahead and ask you, Bodhi, like, do you have any sort of personal methods yourself that you feel comfortable in sharing that go ahead and help you get into that moment of the now, into the present moment and such?
Well, there's a few things I do that taught to me by some teachers that Devi kind of mentioned already, very similarly. Um, and this helps even if you have like anxiety or like a panic attack or anything like that. You ask yourself a few questions, and the first one is, "How's my breathing?" And um, you might notice like if you're having anxiety or something like that, or just in general, like your breathing might be real shallow. So you can just focus on making that breath a little deeper, breathing into your belly, just slowing down the breath. And then you might notice like some change in like the way that you're thinking. And then another question is, how am I holding my body? So when you have anxiety or you're angry, you might have really tense shoulders. So you might relax those and let them back a little bit, roll them back and down. Um, close your eyes, notice where any other tension is in your body. Kind of relax that. Um, and then some other things you can do is like listen to the sounds around you, like see how many sounds you can count around you, see what you can smell around you. Um, Feel the weight of your body and what you're sitting on, between your body and what you're sitting on. Those are a couple things you can do to get real present. And a practice that we used to do with this group I used to be a part of was called listening with grace. And you can do this with a friend or a partner where you would sit across from each other and look each other in the eyes, and you would begin by one person saying to the other person something that they appreciate about them. And the other person would just sit there and then listen. And you set a timer for 5 minutes, and one person just talks, and the other person just tries to listen with while being present for about 5 minutes or so. Um, and then you would switch after that, and you don't give any feedback. You just let the person talk and say what they need to say, whatever's on their heart, whatever's on their mind. They just say it, and it's very therapeutic. And I remember me and my friend, like who did it in this group, were just like glowing. Like people can like physically see us glowing, like radiating, because of because of the energy it produced from just being heard and um, being listened to and receiving the other person's energy without any comment or judgment or anything like that. It's very powerful. I definitely recommend trying it. Those are just a few things that come to mind.
Oh yes. I'll go ahead and point it back over to you, Debbie, of like, do you have any other sort of methods or practices that come to mind in this current moment that you can think of that, would be like, all right, you can potentially utilize this as well to bring about, a state of presence and being here in the now and more so aware of things.
Oh yeah. I kind of touched on it earlier, like Bodhi said. But actually, one of the exercises that my therapist gave me a couple of years ago was she actually had me go walk to the park, sit my ass down in the grass, and then just stare at a patch of grass and like see, okay, are there any bugs there? You're not actually touching anything, but you're just observing and you're just seeing and you're just so focused on this one spot. What do you smell? What do you taste? What do you feel? Um, Touch that one spot. Like is it wet dirt? Does it have grass blades in it? Like what is going on? But it's really, I think, presence is all about your senses and getting back in touch with them. And technically, it's a grounding exercise as well. It's both. Um, because to be present is to be grounded. It's to be physical, um, in my opinion. So with that, it's if you're not in a space where like you can just like go sit in grass and touch grass, sit on the carpet, put your hands in the carpet, and like how does it feel? If you're at your desk chair at work, like put your hands on the chair underneath you. How does the plastic feel? How does the fabric feel? um, Put your hands on your desk, like what does the material feel like, and just kind of like sit there with your senses. And it's funny because your hands will actually start to tingle, and you notice that you know your sense of touch is being heightened just by paying attention to it, and that brings you into the present moment so much. um like it's hilarious. I have used this even when I was typing and just feeling like the keyboard keys under my fingers, and I was sitting there just like, oh my god, my hands are itchy now because everything just feels, I feel everything like 10 times more than would normally. um and it's kind of fun to play with, but you have to figure out what is your particular sense that helps you be the most grounded. For some, like there's a reason why the essential oil craze took off, right? Because some people, it's scent. It's literally smelling things that brings them into that moment. Um, which is why you see all of us ladies at the grocery store, just over at the candle section, just like huffing in candle scents. Like that's
I can just visualize it now.
but it's the truth. Um, or tasting things. It's maybe somebody is like a normal gum chewer, and their way of becoming present is they'll pop that gum into their mouth, but they're not only just taking in the texture of it, um, with every chew, but the taste and the smell and all of that, the sensory, um, technically like sensory arousal, because it's allowing everything to become heightened. Um, but there's many different ways to do so, and it can literally be as simple as popping in a piece of chewing gum.
Oh yes. Um, at least for like me to kind of like want to think back of like a sort of method, like it's we had a recent conversation with Dunster and Light
Mhm.
about meditation, right? And one thing that was covered in that, of like, okay, so what are simple like means of like getting into a meditative state and all of that was just simply like breathing exercises, like in particular the one that's kind of like extremely uber simplistic of the fourfold breath. And just it pretty much like this in of itself, you can follow it, strictly or adapt it to whatever sort of number count works. But all you do is just you breathe in, you can go ahead and you hold it for 4 seconds, and you notice that. Then you go ahead and you breathe out for about 4 seconds, I believe. And then you go ahead and you hold it for 4 seconds, and it's a continual cycle of, the in breath, holding, out breath, holding again, and so on for as long as you need in order to get into that meditative sort of state, and thus, being in the present moment, be more so aware of things and all of that. Granted, meditation can be used for a great variety of different things, not necessarily just for being in the present moment, but of course, it interconnects. It pretty much all the spiritual stuff all interconnects, of course. Um, and all that. And pretty much like, and I guess like in terms of like at least making sure that these are kind of like covered. in the conversation. One thing that I also think is very helpful and useful for people to go ahead and check out is for those who are into Zen Buddhism or maybe interested by the idea of it. There are these particular passages called koans, and when you go ahead and you look at them and you observe them and you study them, and truth be told, like it's not it may seem a little head scratching, at first for some people, based on kind of like how you put things together and process things. But as time goes on, at least from my own experience and from other people that I've discussed it with, you go ahead and you start to get the nature of it as time goes on. But advisory, everybody goes at different speeds, everybody has different manners of comprehending things, and koans are only one avenue to comprehend the nature of being present and being in a zen like state, you could say. um so if you are having a little bit of trouble with it, don't necessarily sweat yourself. You want to do the opposite of sweating. Like, um, don't try to go ahead and hold yourself to the standards of others. Just to put that little thing there. And that applies just about anything. But yes, Zen koans in of themselves are very good tools, very good passages that you can utilize to help understand the nature of the present moment from a conceptual standpoint, and potentially by reading them, um, at least by my understanding of the attestment of different Zen Buddhist masters, have also gone ahead and like elucidated them to being in a present moment state, a state of mindfulness and all that sort of thing, kind of like the light bulb going off in their head by reading it. So yes, that in itself, and just being in that manner of awareness. And also one thing I gotta go ahead and do, considering we were talking about the flow state and all that sort of thing, I have mentioned this particular entity beforehand. um when it comes to the flow state and all that it kind of like relates to, of like music in of itself is like kind of like a creative manner, expression of like things flowing and all that, or water or anything like that. Shout out to the Shinto goddess Benzaiten, who happens to govern all of that flows and all that, for those who like to work with different entities and intelligences and spirits and so on and so forth, that go ahead and govern, different aspects of existence, different archetypes, what have you. I would say that is one that you can go ahead and utilize to help you understand the nature of the flow state more so. um, I'll go ahead and ask you, Bodhi, have you in of yourself called upon any sort of external forces, you can say, under whatever sort of title or distinction, to help you go ahead and get into the present moment, or to be more so mindful and aware and conscious in all of that? Have you happened to do that whatsoever?
Um, hmm. Not sure if I called on one for that intention in particular. Um, Actually, sometimes um, when if I'm going over some verses in the Bible, I'll ask the Holy Spirit to give me discernment and understanding. So that's kind of similar to what you're asking in a sense.
Oh yeah, no, yes, that completely goes ahead and falls under that. Yes, because the Holy Spirit in of itself, like if we're gonna go ahead and use terminology that's already been discussed within this conversation, is like the whole like the Holy Spirit as framed from like a Christian Catholic standpoint is like, the divine inspiration of God in of itself, related to that sort of flow state, right? Coming down upon you, from up above, like with that particular dove imagery, that is seen quite a bit, a lot of times in different Christian arts, like different manners of Christian art, coming down from above, and going ahead and sharing this divine insight, this connection with the higher, you could say. Um, as for yourself, Debbie, right? Like,
Mhm.
are there any particular entities that come to mind that you may have worked with that specialize in being in the present moment and all of that?
Um, ones that specialize in being in the present moment, no. But in terms of like subconscious and kind of allowing subconscious blockages to like release, like I've definitely spoken to Gabrielle about assisting me with that. Um, Hecate, um, it's more so like getting rid of the blockages that are preventing um, me from entering either the flow state or the just the channel of subconscious. Uh, but there's you also have to figure like the way that I operate is different than most people. So it's uh, uh yeah.
Oh yes, and like yeah, and truth be told, right, like even when going ahead and uh even when going ahead and like from my own experiences, right, whether it's been like with you guys group wise or individually, right, like the process in which I go about using different breathing exercises and such, um or like the whole process of what I particularly refer to as prayer invocations, what have you, they go ahead and help me like get into that sort of like more so aware state, and like whatever the purpose may be of trying to contact a intelligence or entity or an aspect of existence, what have you, you should frame it as. But those right there help me become more so in tune with myself and expanding my awareness and such. But truth be told, like in that sort of like topic being covered, and like you know it's all about the inner, right? So even though I'm talking about like things that seem external in of itself, um like these are actually aspects of yourself that you're calling upon, and that, at least that's how I like to frame it and understand it from like the invocation perspective. Like I'm not necessarily trying to look for, oh, what, it's like I'm trying to work for something else and it's outside of myself. Like I guess that's where I bring up the whole terminology of the exoteric and the esoteric understanding of things. And just like I think all of us here, in this particular conversation, and, to whatever extent those who are hearing this conversation may grasp, is like, we have this nature. Well, no, I shouldn't say nature because that would be mislabeling it, but we have this tendency and we have this programming since birth to view things as outside of ourselves, as separate and all this sort of thing. And kind of like one of the general themes, if kind of like not the main general theme of being on like this spiritual sort of journey, is that everything's inside all of us,
Mhm.
everything exists within us. Like we have the whole totality of existence within us, as above, so below, as within, so without, and all of that. And you know what? Like, truth be told, like, it's kind of like bringing it about to that sort of point. I'll just make one more statement, and then kind of like we can go ahead and tie this up in a nice little bow. With like any sort of like last thoughts we have on the subject, is all is one is all. And after having said that, Debbie, do you have any additional thoughts to make in regards to like, the presence, the power of now, mindfulness, anything related to that at all?
Um, the only thing I can really think of is like simplicity is key, um, because it's the overcomplication that kind of fucks us up. But if you think of it in its most simplistic form and um, like That's not articulate, is it? Um, my brain just stopped. Um, but if when you think about presence and you're thinking about how to achieve being here, think of it in a very simple minded way. Overcomplicating it is just going to create more anxiety around it. So the keep it simple, stupid, twisted method.
Oh yes, and she's mentioning that because I haven't subscribed to the Kiss model quite a bit. And I will say, for better or for worse, and at times to the annoyance of other folks, I'm sure Debbie here can definitely attest, and also Bodhi as well, whether he wishes to verbalize it or not. But just to say that in the sense of like all three of us here, we've had quite a few ups and downs as friends and all that sort of thing. A lot of experiences shared generally, but swinging over to you, Bodhi. You are the esteemed guest on this particular conversation, and like presence, the power of now, mindfulness, all that sort of thing. What are your closing thoughts about the topic at this present moment?
Mm. I'd say just practice, start with mindfulness practices and ease your way in, like trying to be present while washing the dishes or walking your dog or with your kids or what or eating. Try eating with the opposite hand, using your utensil in the opposite hand, or brushing your teeth with the opposite hand, and this will actually um, trigger more mindfulness and more presence in you. Might even make your food taste better. Um, yeah. So yeah, just start with that, and then work your way up, and you'll start noticing that things become more enjoyable when you're more present. Yeah.
Oh yes, and I think that about does it for the subject matter. I think we covered quite a bit, and first and foremost, I just want to say, hey, yo, thank you for coming through, Bodhi.
Thank
We
you.
don't necessarily get to talk as often as we used to, but whenever you do come through, man, I definitely enjoy having you, like, around, like, your persona, like, your bubbly sort of nature, all that sort of thing. Like, I definitely enjoy it, my brother, man. Like, yes. So thank
Thank
you
you
for coming through, man.
for having me.
Yes,
Thank you
sir.
guys. You guys are awesome.
Yes, sir. And one more thing of like, do you have anything that you wish to like promote? You want to plug? You want to shill? You want to go ahead and put out there? In a verbal sense. And of course, if you've got any sort of links, we'll put it in the description box as well. But yeah, like, do you have anything you want to go ahead and give a shout out to?
Oh yeah, yeah. We're me and this group are working on this project called the Climate Cafe, and it's gonna be a low carbon footprint, locally sourced, pay what you can event, and we're looking for donations or volunteers or anything. It'll be in near Portland, Oregon. So if anybody that's listening to this is near there, then that would be awesome for you to come by. Our first event is on September 3rd, 2022.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes. You got anything else that you want to go ahead and plug?
Um, you can check out my music if you like. I talked about it a little bit in here, so that'll be on
Hey.
SoundCloud. I'm sure I can get Twisted to post a link in the description
Mhm.
Oh,
to my.
damn straight, damn straight. Yes. So yes. Do you have anything more else you want to go ahead and plug, or you think that's about it?
I think that's about it.
Oh, okay. So yeah, uh, with that conversation being done, being in the present moment, the power of now and of itself, all of that, here we are, here and now. Oh, and that reminds me, there's one book by Ram Dass where he goes and talks about the subject. I think it's Be Here Now, if I'm getting the title correctly. But it it's something similar to that. But in any case, aside from that last moment mention, yeah, like, you know, this is Twisted with Open Sorcery, and stay frosty, Neguses. Peace.
See y'all next time.
Peace. Take care.
Yay, yay!